Tom Stebbins from the Lawsuit Reform Alliance. Thanks so much for joining us here on New York Now this week.
Great to be with you, Dan.
So we're talking about something that I think a lot of people would not foresee coming from the COVID-19 pandemic, which is people trying to sue other people and companies because they feel like that other person or company may have done something that would merit a lawsuit, which is liability is what it comes down to. Liability meaning when somebody does something and you think they might have been negligent, so you want to sue them or a company or something like that. And I know that the state has put some protections in place right now to dismiss liability, make sure that people do not sue companies or people that may be in the healthcare industry. And I want to ask you to kind of explain that a little bit. So do we have doctors and hospitals that are exempt from liability in lawsuits right now? How far does that reach for us?
Well, one of the things that the governor did right at the outset of the pandemic was to cover doctors, medical professionals, and importantly, volunteer medical professionals from liability related to COVID. Now, you can still sue, but if it's in relation to COVID, you have to prove a particular barrier, which is gross negligence, right? So you can still sue, but you have to essentially say that they were grossly negligent. And that was so important to get many of the volunteers, of which we got tens of thousands, to come out of retirement, to come from other states, and to come to help at the outset of the pandemic. In early April, the legislature extended those protections to hospitals and medical facilities. And the entire legislature voted on that as part of the budget process. And again, it was with the caveat of gross negligence and willful misconduct. So if somebody gets COVID, it is not necessarily the doctor or hospital's fault unless they were grossly negligent or engaged in willful misconduct.
When you say gross negligence, which is the standard you would have to meet to actually bring one of these lawsuits if you were able to, what does that rise to? I know that we can't really give specific examples because there are obviously a lot of different situations here, but would this be something where maybe a healthcare facility or a doctor blatantly ignored the state's regulations or something like that? Or does it have to go further than that? What's the kind of range that we're looking at there?
I mean, I think a good example is you have diagnosed somebody positive with COVID, and then you put them into a room with somebody without COVID, right? And somebody who is there for some other medical procedure, right? That would be grossly negligent because simply we know, even as non-medical professionals, that that's not a good idea. So, and a doctor should know that. And I think that would rise to the level of grossly negligent. And then willful misconduct is, of course, this person I don't like and I'm going to do something to make their life problematic. And that would be willful misconduct, which is one of the other standards that is the caveat to these kinds of protections.
So what about nursing homes? Because something that you said that struck me is like putting COVID patients into non-COVID places. And I know we had allegedly a problem with that in some nursing homes in New York State. Do these liability protections from the governor and the legislature extend to nursing homes? Are they exempt from being sued because of COVID-related situations?
Again, you're not exempt from being sued. You can still be sued. Right. You just have to prove gross negligence. And in the case of nursing homes, you bring up a great example because Governor Cuomo decided that nursing homes need to accept COVID patients. And so just by accepting it, you are accepting a certain degree of risk, but the government has insisted that you do that. So it is not something that you could avoid. It is an unavoidable risk, and therefore liability should not be applied.
So just to clarify for my viewers, because I've said this probably incorrectly like 3 times during this interview, it's not that you can't sue, it's that you have a higher standard to sue is what we're looking at. And I know that this extends far beyond healthcare facilities, including nursing homes, hospitals, things like that. But as we start to go through this reopening process, there's all of these questions of retailers and businesses and what kind of regulations are going to apply to them, and are they eligible for that higher threshold of a lawsuit, or are they in the regular realm of being sued and things like that? I know you're part of a coalition that wants stronger liability protections for these businesses. Tell me what that would look like and why you want to see it.
Yeah, so we joined with a number of other businesses, including hospitality groups, to call on the governor to extend those liability protections to retailers, to grocery stores, to pharmacies, to those kinds of groups, to say that they're not essentially liable for COVID in their stores as long as they weren't grossly negligent, and importantly, in the case of businesses and reopening, as long as they complied with state and federal guidelines and regulations. And those guidelines would include, for example, face masks. So as long as the business is compliant with that, and then a customer or employee comes down with COVID, it is not necessarily the business's fault, and you did not necessarily contract it at that business. It is impossible, essentially, to prove that would happen, and we want to protect retailers, we want to protect grocery stores and other places that are reopening from those kinds of lawsuits. Because for a lot of small businesses, win or lose, a lawsuit can be devastating. And so we want to provide those protections and help our businesses understand that they are protected during these uncertain times.
All right, well, we will leave it there. Tom Steppins from the Lawsuit Reform Alliance. Your perspective is much appreciated on this show. A lot of great explaining of how the legal system works and how this all affects everyone. Thanks so much for being here on New York Now this week.
Thanks so much for having me, Dan.